All right, everybody, this is section 1.4. It's our final Co-Req section. After tomorrow we're going to do the test review for the Co-Req test 2. But after tomorrow, we're going to be doing college algebra. So, and by the way, the stuff we're doing right now is college algebra also, but they're calling it the Co-Req stuff you should have practiced with at least in high school and understand it a little bit. So it is a lot, especially if you've been out of school for a while and you don't remember doing this in high school. So the zero factor property. Guess what we're doing today? We're going to factor the zero factor property, and I mentioned this yeah, decades. I actually graduated high school 40 years ago. Can you believe that? 40 years ago and 10 days. No, yeah, 40 years ago and 10 days, something like that. That's a long time. All right. Oh, the zero multiply rule. I talked about it last time, where you have two things multiplied together and the answer is 0. If I put a 5 here, the only number you can put in this is 0. If I have two things multiplied together and I put an 8 here and the answer is 0, the only thing that could be here is 0. In other words, if you multiply two numbers together and the answer is 0, one or both of those numbers have to be 0, because that's the only way to get an answer of 0. That's the zero factor property. Multiply by 0, and one of those parentheses or one of those numbers have to be 0. Zero factor property. I call it the zero multiply rule. So solving means tell me what x equals. Every time you see the word solve, you're going to tell me what x equals. And all these, so the first thing you do is factor. Oh no, you have to learn how to factor. So I have 3 terms. We're just factoring this part. I have 3 terms, and the number in front of x squared is 1, so it's an easy thing. 24 is 1 times 24, the last pair. 2 times 12, 3 times 8, and 4 times 6. How do I get a positive 10? Okay, I see 2 positive 10 possibilities. I can do a plus 4 and a plus 6. Or I can do a plus 12 and a minus 2. I have 2 possibilities. Can somebody tell me which is correct, number 1 or number 2? Type it in the chat. Which is the correct pair that equals 10? They both equal 10, but which one do I use, number 1 or number 2? Which one do I use? Can somebody tell me? X, do I use minus 2 plus 12 or plus 4 plus 6? 1 or 2? 1, 1, 2, Okay, so we got 2 1s and some 2s. Remember, these have to add or subtract to equal the middle term. They both do. But also, if you multiply them, 4 times 6 equals 24. Negative 2 times 12 equals negative 24. When you multiply them, they have to equal the last term. Do you see? This is the answer, not number 2, because when you multiply them, it equals negative 24. When you add or subtract them, it equals the middle term plus 10. So minus 2 and plus 12 are the answer for this one, number 1. Okay? Everybody see that? Don't forget, there's some problems where they get 2 possible answers. You have to multiply them together and see if they equal the last term. They add or subtract to equal the middle term, but they multiply to equal the last term. So I have 2 things multiplying together to equal 0. So x minus 2 has to equal 0, or x plus 12 has to equal 0. This is kind of like the rational functions where we found the numbers that are undefined, but here we're just setting the 0 property, and then we're solving. I have to take the 2 to the other side. Remember to solve for x, get x on one side, everything else to the other. It's a minus 2, so I'm going to do the opposite to both sides. Add 2 to both sides. 2 minus 2 is 0. I am left with x equals 2. That's one answer. If I want to get the 12 to the other side now, it's a plus 12. I have to minus 12 both sides. 12 minus 12 is 0. My answer is x equals a negative 12. These are my two answers. I think in the homework they say write your two answers down. If you have more than one, separate them by a comma. So then you would just write 2 and negative 12. It doesn't matter what order you put them in. But there are two answers for this problem. Okay. We're going to factor, then set each parentheses equal to 0 and solve for x. Okay. We might want to write this down now because number 2 looks different than number 1. This is solving. Remember, solving means tell me what x equals. So when we do this, when we're solving and factoring first, the first thing you should do is get everything to one side. Get everything to one side and make it equal to 0. Just like the top one. Do you see the top one? If I can get there, how come it won't stop? There. Do you see everything is on one side on the top and it's equal to 0. So that's what we want to do with the bottom one, or number 2. Same thing we want to do with number 2. And the x squared has to be positive, so I need to take this over and this over. The only way to get x's and numbers over to the other side is adding and subtracting. So to take the negative 18x to the other side, you have to do the opposite of minus 18x. You have to add 18x. Same way with the minus 36. Do the opposite, add 36, add 36. Those turn to 0. Minus 18 plus 18 is 0. Minus 36 plus 36 is 0. So the right side is 0. The left side is you can't add x squares with x's, so I have 2x squared plus 18x plus 36. Okay, so I just took everything to the other side. If it's a minus 18, you'll take it to the other side is add 18. Minus 36, you add 36. Now we factor. And then finally, the 0 multiply rule. 0 multiply rule. And set each one solve for x. Set each one equal to 0. So we got to factor this. This is an 18 here. It looks different, but it's an 18. If you look, can somebody tell me how do I factor this 3 terms? What do I do first? Anybody know?
Divide by 2?
Yes. What she really meant to say was factor out a GCF. That's always the first step of factoring. Factor out a GCF. And you see they all divide by 2. So I'm going to divide each one by 2. And 2 divided by 2 is 1x squared. 18 divided by 2 is 9x. 36 divided by 2 is 18. And that's what I get. This 2 is insignificant. If I want to take it to the other side, it's minus. It's multiply. If 2 is multiplying the parentheses, if I divide both sides by 2, the 2's just disappear. 2 divided by 2 is 1. and I'm left with, I'm going to erase, no, I'm not going to erase it. And I'm left with this, because 0 divided by 2 is still 0. Do you see? So we're left with this factoring. And it's an easy factor because the number in front of x squared is 1. When we factor out the GCF, now we're 1. So all the things that multiply together to get 18, 1 times 18, 2 times 9, 3 times 6. And I need to get a positive 9. The only way to get a positive 9 is a plus 3 and a plus 6. 1 times 18, 2 times 9, 3 times 6. So this factors to xx, a plus 3 and a plus 6. And then we use the 0 multiply rule, x plus 3 equals 0, or the x plus 6 equals 0. And then solve for x. In other words, get x by itself. It's a plus 3. We're going to subtract 3 to both sides. Here, take the 6 over. It's a plus 6. We're going to minus 6 to both sides. And there's my two answers, -3 and -6. So if you haven't practiced your factoring, like I said, there's going to be a lot of problems because even in the college algebra stuff, you have to factor. Factor is not even the problem. The problem here is using the 0 multiply rule. We're factoring to get to that. So this problem doesn't even say factoring, but you have to be able to factor to get to the answer. All right, let's try number 3. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm rushing. I'm going to try to slow down, especially for number 3. If you look at number 3, there's no GCF. 3, 2, 5, nothing divides out. So I have to factor it. If we look at our step, everything's on one side of the equal sign. So that's okay. Step 1 is okay. Everything's on one side. Then factor it. Since there's a number in front of the x squared, we have to use the AC method. So AC is 3 times 5. The 3 and the 5. 3 times 5 is 15. So I have 1 times 15. 3 times 5. Those are the only two things that equal 15. How do I get a -2? Think about it. Think about it. A +3 and a -5 give me a -2. If you're not sure about that, put it in your calculator. 3 minus 5, you get a -2. So those are not our answers. That's how we split the middle. And I'm going to use the negative first. I don't want the third term to be negative. So I'm using a positive 3x and a -5x. We have to split it up to x's because of that -2x. This equals -2, but you have to get the x there. So +3 minus 5x is -2x. Then I still have this -5 and this 3x squared. So once we do that in the AC method, next we have to group the first two terms, group the second two terms, and oh, I really wanted to put the negative first, didn't I? Did I? But that's okay. Factor out. If you look at the first, a 3 and an x factors out of that first parentheses. So if I divide both by 3x, I'm just left with 1x. 3x divided by 3x is blank. You know, they cancel out. It's not blank. Remember, when they cancel out, it turns to 1. The third term is negative, so don't forget to factor out a negative. We're going to factor out a negative, and they both have a 5 in it. So if I divide both by -5, -5 divided by -5 is +1x. and -5 divided by -5 is a +1. The parentheses are identical. I'll give you a second. Factor using the AC. You have to use the AC when there's a number other than 1 in front of that x squared, and there are 3 terms. We're now going to factor out the parentheses out in front. The x plus 1 factors out, and the other stuff goes in the other parentheses, 3x minus 5. Don't forget there's an equals 0 here. So we have two things multiplying together, the x plus 1 equals 0, or the 3x minus 5 equals 0. And we're going to solve for x for each one. I'm going to give you a second to solve for x. I want to see if you can solve these for x. Get x by itself, everything else to the other side. There's one answer. What did you get for the next answer? Anybody want to type the next one in? If you dare. Uh-oh. You gotta know how to solve for x. I mean, that was one of the first things we did. You have to take the 3 over and the 5 over. The question is, which one do you take first? Remember the 5 steps for solving we did. Step 4 and 5. Step 4 says take the add and subtract over first. Step 5 says take the multiply and divide. This is subtracting the x or the side. This is multiplying. You always take the add and subtract over to the other side. -5, you add 5 to both sides. And then you divide by 3. I need to take the 3 to the other side. It's multiplying. You have to divide by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1x, and 5 divided by 3 is a fraction. There's our two answers here. I mean, we're not learning a new thing each day. We're building on what we previously learned. If you don't spend at least, I'm going to say in this course, you have to spend at least 10 to 15 hours a week doing your homework and studying. If you're just trying to get through your homework, then you're not studying. I can't stress this enough. Studying happens after the homework is completed, because if you're just still doing the homework, you're just trying to finish it. You're not studying. This course takes a lot of time. It's a summer. It's taking twice as fast as a 16-week course. A 16-week course is tough enough, and this is twice as fast. Yes, but that's why I said you have to spend hours getting that homework done and then do the homework. Studying happens after the homework is completed. It takes hours sometimes to do the homework. You're going to see it. I mean, we're just going to keep on going and going. There's no stopping. I can't rest for a day. Because we won't finish the course. All right, let's try number 4. I know it sounds brutal, but hey, you signed up for the course. I'm just here because you signed up for it. If nobody signed up, I wouldn't be here. And it makes sense if you have the time, and I would try to find the time to watch the videos over again. I know some of these videos are long. Hell, I think the one review session we had was almost a 2-hour for test 1, a 2-hour video. But it helps going over these problems over and over again. All right, so this problem, everything's not on one side, so I need to take the 3 to the other side. It's a positive 3, so I'm going to subtract 3 to both sides. I'm left with 6x squared plus 7x minus 3. You see, the 7x and the 3 can't add or subtract together because one's an x and one's a number. So we have everything on one side. Now use the AC method to factor, because there's a number in front of x squared. You have to use the AC method. And if you haven't been practicing, it's a tough move. I would take good notes. You can use your notes on the test. Any note that you take in the workbook, use it on the test. But even add pages to the workbook. I want you to do well and use those notes. The steps and procedures for the AC method. Multiply A times C. 6 times 3 is 18, so 1 times 18. 2 times 9. 3 times 6. How do I get 7? A minus 2 and a plus 9. That's the only way I can get a plus 7. So we're going to split the middle with a minus 2x and a plus 9x. Do you see? We have to use that to split the middle. Group the first two, group the second two, make sure there's a plus sign between it. This is all the steps from factoring an AC method. Find the GCF of the parentheses. Here, a 2 can divide out, and the lowest power x is x. So if I divide both of those by 2x, I end up with 6 divided by 2 is 3, x squared divided by x is x. 2x divided by 2x is just 1. Then I'm going to factor here. A 3 looks like it factors out of both of these. 9 divided by 3 is 3x. Negative 3 divided by a positive 3 is a negative 1. Factor out the parentheses since it's identical. 3x minus 1. Whatever's left over, 2x plus 3, goes in the other parentheses. Then we set them equal to 0. 3x minus 1 equals 0, and 2x plus 3 equals 0. Both of these, since it's the 0 multiply rule, one of these two have to equal 0. I'm going to take the 1 over first. Solving, you always take the add and subtract over to the other side first. So it's a plus 1 plus 1. And then divide by 3. Divide by 3, divide by 3. And x equals 1/3. The answer is a fraction. Here, take the 3 over to the other side first. And I'm left with 2x equals negative 3, then divide by 2. Divide by 2, divide by 2, and x equals a negative 3 over 2. These are the two answers for this problem. 1/3 and negative 3 over 2. You saw, look at all this writing. If you're not doing all this writing on your paper when you're doing the homework, then I'm not sure how you're getting the answer. That's a lot of writing. That's a lot of steps and procedures to get to the answer. It takes time. It really is. Math is very logical, steps and procedures, but you can't just follow the steps and procedures. You have to be able to practice these before you can get to it. That's why if you don't do the homework, if you don't do this homework tomorrow, by tomorrow, then you're gonna lose a lot. The retention for this material goes out the window after 2 or 3 days. People look at it and say, I have no idea what to do unless you practice it. So practice it as soon as you can. If the longer you wait, the more you're gonna lose. And then, or watch the video again, and that'll help. It's tough. All right, so that was the zero factor, the zero factor property. We're using another technique now to solve for x. We're going to use another technique to solve for x. The square root property this time. Okay. So in order to use the square root property, we need to know that the square root of 4 equals 2. So 2 squared equals 4. No, I don't know. I don't know how to. Yes. No. Let me rephrase that. Hang on. Let me erase that part. I'm going to put the steps for the square root property. Square root property steps. Step number 1. Isolate the square on one side. So sometimes it's an x square, sometimes it's just a parenthesis squared. So do you see how we have this is isolated on one side? Same way with this parentheses. The square is isolated by itself on one side. That's step 1. If you don't have it by itself on one side, then you got to make it that way. And I'm sure we're going to have an example like that. Step 2, take the square root of both sides. What did I just write? That doesn't look like the word take. Is it getting late? Take the square root of both sides. By the way, I mean, I'm just going to put this down here, 2x equals 6. To get the 2 over, the 2 is multiplying times the x. How do I take the 2 over to the other side? Somebody tell me, how do I take the 2 over to the other side? 2 times x equals 6. How do I take the 2 to the other side? Solving for
Divide
x.
by 2?
Yes, you always do the opposite. No, it's 2 times x. 2x is 2 times x. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. Okay? So to get something to the other side, you have to do the opposite. The opposite of square, do you see the opposite of square is square root. That's why we do that in step 2. The opposite of square is square root. So watch here. Step 1, isolate the x squared. We have it. Step 2, whatever you do to one side, you do the other. Square root both sides. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but there's an invisible 2. That's why we call it a square root. Because if it was a third root, there'd be a 3 there. But it's a square root, and the square root is invisible. So what happens is the square root and square cancel each other out, and we're just left with x equals the square root of negative 16. Okay. So step one, isolate the parentheses squared on one side or the x squared on one side, and then take the square root of both sides. Now, can somebody go to the back of the book and tell me, is the answer 4i, or is the answer not a real number or something? What's the answer say in the back of the book for number 5? I got a feeling it says something different.
It says plus or negative 4i.
Okay, good. So it does say that. So step 3. When you get the x equals, there's always 2 answers. 2 answers. A plus or a minus that has to be there. And I'm going to show you that why. I'm going to show you why. So this ends up being x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 16. And we already know, I'm just going to show you the square root of 16 is square root of negative 1 times the square root of 16. Square root of 16 is 4, and the square root of negative 1 is I. So this answer here becomes x equals plus or minus 4i, right? We have 4i, and the I always come after. There's 2 answers, a plus 4 and a minus 4. I'm going to show you why. If I have, I'm going to put this here. If I have x squared equals 25, can somebody tell me what number goes into the x so I get 25? What does x equal?
5.
5. X equals 5. But watch this. I just want to make sure everybody sees this. I'm gonna put it in my calculator. Just because I think it's you see things better if it's on the calculator. So we already said 5 times 5, 5 squared, 5 raised to the second power equals 25. However, negative 5 in parentheses squared also equals 25. Do you see there's 2 ways of getting the answer? A plus 5 squared, 5 times 5, or a minus 5 times a negative 5. Negative 5 times negative 5 is also a positive 25. So there's 2 possible answers there. There's 2 possible answers. We already said square root both sides. X equals plus or minus square root of negative I times square root of 16. 16 is 4. This is I. There's a plus or minus. Then I always put the number first, plus or minus 4i. In other words, if you wrote it out, one answer is 4i. The other answer is negative 4i. Same way with 25. X squared equals 25. 5 times 5 equals 25. Also, negative 5 times negative 5 equals 25. That's why we get the 2 answers. I can put 5 in here, or I can put negative 5 in there, and they both give me 25. So that's why this problem has 2 answers. You can write it like this, or you can write it like that. Either one is the correct answer. They're both the same. So I erased those steps. I hope I'm going to write them again for number 6. So number 6, step 1, isolate the x square or the parentheses square, and it's isolated by itself. So we're good to go there. Step number 2, square root both sides. I'm going to square root this side, and I'm going to square root this side. Step 3, and I'm going to put, don't forget, square root of a square cancel out. The square root and a square cancel out. So when I do that, I'm left with x plus 5 equals the square root of 16. Step 3, also in front of left side, put plus or minus. So in front of the left side, I'm going to put a plus or minus, because there's 2 possible answers. We already said that. So, and now step 3, step 4, solve for x. I just need to take this 5 to the other side by subtracting 5, subtracting 5. And x equals -5 plus or minus the square root of 16. By the way, put the square root of 16 on your calculator. It's 4. So we're not done. Before we could use the plus or minus symbol, but now we just have numbers. So we have to do the math. There are 2 answers here, by the way. We already said we have 2 answers here. So one answer, okay. God, Jose, you missed it. I gave all the answers to test 2 while you were gone. So there's 2 answers here. One answer is -5 plus 4. The other answer is -5 minus 4. Do you see? One answer is -5 plus 4. The other answer is -5 minus 4. -5 plus 4 is a -1. -5 minus 4 is a -9. So number 6 has 2 answers. All right, let's try number 7. Step 1, isolate the square root, the square. It is step 2, square root both sides. Square root, square cancel. So I'm left with 9x plus 7 equals plus or minus the square root of 11, right? Square root, square cancel. Make sure there's a plus or minus in front on the right side. Did I say left or right on the steps? I hope I said on the right side. That plus or minus has to be on the right side. And then solve for x. Get the 7 over and the 9 over. Really important. You have to know which one goes over to the other side when we're solving. We did the solving steps 2 weeks ago, I think. I don't think we did them last week. But we did the solving steps 2 weeks ago. This 9 is multiplying times the x. This 7 is adding. When you're solving, you always take the add and subtract over to the other side first. It's a plus 7, so I'm going to minus 7. I am left with 9x equals a -7 plus or minus the square root of 11. I put it in front. Then I'm going to divide by 9. Divide this side by 9 and divide this side by 9. 9 divided by 9 is 1x. On the right side, we're just left with -7 plus or minus square root 11 over 9. You can put this in your calculator. It doesn't change, but that is the answer. If you put that in your answer, you know, with a plus. By the way, I can't stress this enough. That plus or minus means there's 2 answers. One answer is -7 plus square root 11 over 9. The other answer is -7 minus the square root of 11 over 9. That's what that plus or minus is telling you. There's one answer with a plus. There's another answer with a minus between them. Try to get this homework done as soon as you can so you can start studying for that test. Please don't cut corners. You're going to need it. We haven't even started the algebra stuff yet. Algebra starts Thursday. I think I'm gonna let you. I'm gonna open up the test when it is due Sunday. I'll probably open it up tomorrow. Thanks for asking, Matilda, because I got to remember to get a password in there. So remind me tomorrow also in class or right before class. So come to class 5 minutes early. And I'll open it up tomorrow. I'll open up the test tomorrow because we're going to do the review tomorrow. All right, question number 8. Solve using the quadratic formula. This is what your Canvas quiz is about. Question number 8. I got a really good video on quadratic formula. How many questions do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4 more questions and quadratic formula. So quadratic formula, first thing you need to do is actually write down the quadratic formula. This is the quadratic formula. X, we're trying to find out what x equals. -b plus or minus the square root b squared minus a times c, all divided by 2 times a. What? That's the quadratic formula. This is the formula we are about to use. We're going to plug the numbers in and then do the math. All right. So this is how I'm going to do it. Replace just as it's, by the way, can anybody tell me what the B's and the A's and the C's mean? Anybody know? How about this? Can somebody tell me what B equals? Does anybody know in this problem? There's a B in this formula. Can somebody tell me what B equals for question number 8? What does B?
14.
Say that again?
-14?
Yes. So don't forget, we already said this is A, this is C, so this is B. So in our problem, I'm going to write down A is the number in front of x squared. It's an invisible 1. B is the number in front of the x. It's a -14. And C is the number without the x, a +74. So we're going to plug all this in. Now look at the formula. -b, I put a parentheses everywhere I see a letter. Square root b squared minus, oh wait, there's a 4 here. I even wrote the formula down wrong. Did I say it, but I didn't write it down? Minus 4ac, minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. So I'm going to plug the correct numbers in. B is -14, so I put a -14 in here and a -14 in here. A is 1. I put a 1 here and a 1 here. And C is 74. All right. Let's see if we can put this into our calculator exactly as we see it. Oh my, with the negatives and parentheses and everything. Start off with a fraction. Let's see if you can do it. Negative, parentheses, -14. So they're both negatives. And don't put plus or minus, just use the plus. and then square root negative square root with a parentheses. Maybe I should do this also. Raise it to the second power. Oh, Lord, bring it down. Subtract 4 parentheses 1 parentheses 74 close parentheses all over 2 times 1 is 2. I'm just going to put 2 in there. So that's not an easy thing to type in. And I got an error, so I typed something in wrong. Oh, I think I know why. Let me see. Oh, this is going to be a mess. 144. Okay, don't type it in. I'm going to show you why. All right, so we're going to, if you type it in, you're going to get an error. Everybody should get an error.
Can you show the calculator on the big screen?
Yeah, but we got an error. You got an error, so we can't type this in the calculator. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you how to correctly do this. Okay. First, put this. Let me get a pen because I got to write this down.
So I got a negative 134. So I must have not did what you did.
You got an answer of negative 134?
Correct.
That's wrong. That's wrong. Yeah. That's wrong. That's wrong.
I tried.
Right. Oh, wait, hang on. So let's do inside the square root first. Let me write the whole thing down. Give me a second, because once I leave here, I can't see it. I need to have my own workbook. All right, so I'm going. Oh God, I don't want to leave because then when I come back, it's all messed up. But it's okay. Let's stop sharing and go to our calculator. All right, so I'm going to type the whole thing in and just show you how it's messed up. So first we type in the fraction. Then there's a negative sitting out in front. Then we had the parentheses, negative 14. Then we had plus and minus, but I'm just going to use the plus for now. The square root, parentheses, then we put the negative 14 and we squared it. Then I arrow over with subtract 4 times 1 times 74, close parentheses. Then I bring it down to the bottom. Did it go down to the bottom? What happened? Uh-oh. Can you guys, oh, my camera went out. Give me a second. What happened? Did I turn it off by accident? There it is. All right, then we went down to the bottom and there was a 2 times 1, which is 2. So I typed it all in. If you look at the whole thing is typed in. If I go, you can go all the way over. The whole thing is typed in exactly as we saw it. When you hit enter, it gives you an error. And I'm going to tell you why. Because it ends up with a negative inside of the square root. So we're just going to do the square root part. The square root of parentheses negative 14 squared minus 4 times 1 times 74. So I'm just going to do the inside of the square root part. Watch what happens when I hit enter. It also says error. Why? Because you can't take the square root of a negative number. Remember, our calculator won't do that. So when this happens, we're just going to do the inside without the square root. This is a lot of work. So the inside without the square root is negative 14 squared. See, I'm not using the square root. Minus square root, parentheses 4, 1, and 74. So I typed it all in, and now when I hit enter, that's not right. Is that right?
Where are you getting the 4 from?
The formula,
Don't you have to bring it
4AC.
down? Don't you have to bring it down?
Bring what down?
You have
No,
everything-
I'm just doing wait, hang on. See, that's why I got away from my screen. We're doing this part. You can't do this on your calculator. What I'm trying to tell you, you can't do this on your calculator because there's a negative inside the square root.
But on the calculator, they're all on the top where the square root is. Where the 2 is, you put all the other numbers on the top. You didn't press enter.
Oh, okay. Hang on. Over 2 times A. This is the formula. So I want to plug in just this part. The B squared minus 4AC. B squared minus 4 times A times C. A was 1. C was 74. And B squared, this is A equals 1. B equals negative 14, and C equals 74. You see, this equals negative 14. So I want to just do this part here, the inside. Parentheses negative 14 minus 4 times 1 times 74. And if you put this in your calculator, does anybody else get negative 310?
I got negative 100.
Let's try that again. Parentheses negative 14 squared minus 4 times 1 times 74. Oh, I got negative 100 also. I must have typed something in wrong. You're right. So we get negative 100. Is everybody okay getting, you got to be able to type this in. Look at me. I typed, I think I had something saved on my calculator. That's why. I'm just typing this part in. You can't take the square root of negative 100. My calculator says error. So so I'm going to rewrite this problem now. I'm going to rewrite this problem. Yes, negative 100. So I'm going to rewrite the problem. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root over 2 times a. And we got, for the square root, inside the square root, we got negative 100. Do you see? I just want to make sure. Inside the square root, we got negative 100. Negative b is negative 14 here, and a was 1. All right, so now I want you to put this in your calculator. Oh, no, I'm not even going to have you put it in your calculator yet. Does anybody know what 2 negatives next to each other mean right there? When you have a negative, when you have
It makes it a plus sign.
Yes, two negatives next to each other change to a plus. So this problem is really x equals a positive 14 plus or minus the square root of negative 100 over 2 times 1 on the bottom is 2. Okay, so let's look at this. Can somebody tell me just what this equals? What's the square root of negative 100 equal?
10i.
10i, perfect.
Like
The
0.
square root of 100 is 10, and the negative is I. So this changes to 14 plus or minus 10I over 2. So we have two answers. Give me a second. We have two answers. X equals 14 plus 10I over 2, and X equals 14 minus 10I over 2. Because the one's a plus and one's a minus. So there are two answers here. By the way, when you divide by 2 and both of these divide by 2, you can rewrite it as 14 over 2 plus 10 over 2I. You see the 2 is underneath both of those. Same way with here, 14 over 2 minus 10 over 2I. The 2 is underneath both of those. 14 over 2 is 7. 10 over 2 is 5. There's one answer. 14 over 2 is 7. 10 over 2 is 5. There's the other answer. So one answer is 7 plus 5I. The other answer is 7 minus 5I. It's only difficult. This problem is only difficult like this because of the inside is negative. They decided to do a really hard one for the first problem. If the inside is negative, you have to do it separate. You have to do it separate. If the inside is positive, I think we can plug it straight into our calculator. So let's go to number 9 and see if that one's easier, but we're using the same formula. If that inside, so I think that's what you need to try each time. If the inside is positive, then we can put it straight into our calculator. Let's try the next one. I'm going to give you a second if anybody's writing this down. It's kind of organized, but it's still pretty messy. All right, let's see what we get for number 9. Hopefully. Okay, number 9, you need to take everything to one side. So I need to take everything to one side and make it equal to 0. That's the only way to use the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And then we're going to plug it into the formula, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Somebody asked me, where do I get the 4 from? The 4 is part of the formula. So I need to take the 12 to the other side by adding 12x, adding 12x. Take the 5 to the other side, it's a minus 5, so I'm going to add 5, add 5. On the right side, I end up with 0. On the left side, I end up with 3x squared plus 12x plus 5. A is the number in front of x squared. A is 3. B is 12, and C is 5. I'm going to plug it into the formula. Negative b, put a parentheses everywhere you see a letter. B squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. So a is 3, so everywhere there's an a in the formula, right here and right here, I'm putting a 3. B is 12. There's a 12 here and a 12 here. And C is 5. Now, on your calculator, just tell me what this equals right here. 12 squared minus 4 times 3 times 5. I think we should do it like this each time. Did you get 84? Oh, wait. Let's see. Should have got, I think.
I got 84.
Good, good. So we're going to do that every time. Since the inside is positive, we can actually put this in our calculator now. I'm going to do this in our calculator. Negative 12 plus 84. Negative 12 plus 84, square root of 84 over 6. Oh, by the way, it's not just plus, it's plus or minus. Let's see what happens if I'm just going to put the plus into my calculator. So let me go to the calculator, and we're going to do fraction. And it's negative 12. And we're just going to use the plus because you can't do plus or minus. Square root of 84. And then on the bottom we had 6. 2 times 3 was 6. So there's my answer. If I hit enter, I get the answer reduced there. So my answer is that. Did everybody get that on their calculator when they typed it in? I hope you did. They end up putting the 12 in the back.
Yes, I got it.
Good. So coming back here, our answer is the square root of 21 minus 6 over 3. But the answer should be plus or minus, right? I mean, you can go back and do the minus. The plus or minus always goes in front of the square root. So this is one way of writing the answer. Remember, our calculator is backwards. So let's put the minus 6 in front, plus or minus square root of 21 over 3. This is the way the back of the book has the answer, but I mean, this is correct. That plus or minus always goes in front of the square root. And remember, our calculator always does it backwards. They put that number to the right of the square root, but it should be in, I mean, all the answers in the book and in the homework, they normally want it in the front, but you can put it in the back. You can write it like this, but just make sure the plus or minus goes in front of the radical. You see, in front of the square root. The plus or minus has to go in front of the square root. There are two answers here, negative 6 plus square root of 21 over 3 and negative 6 minus the square root of 21 over 3. That's what that plus or minus is for. It tells you there's two answers. And in the homework, sometimes you only have to type this in once because they give you that plus or minus symbol. So I think on the homework, you can actually click on that plus or minus symbol so you don't have to type it out twice. So sometimes the homework makes you type it out twice, depending on the system. Sometimes they make you type it out once and use that plus or minus. But that plus or minus always goes in front of the square root. And that's number 3. So we're going to try the next one the same way. We're going to do the inside of the square root first once we do that work. I think that might help out. All right, let me clear this and try number 10. Okay, everything's on one side. A equals 5, B equals 12, and C equals 6. The formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared. B squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all divided by 2 times a. Everywhere I see a letter, I always put a parentheses because people get the signs wrong if you don't do that. A is 5. There's a here and an a here. B is 12, 12, 12, and C is 6. All right. Let's do the inside first. On our calculator, 12 squared minus 4 times 5 times 6. On your calculator. Because we want to see if it's positive or negative. And I'll bring it down here. X equals negative 12 plus or minus the square root 144 and 120. You should get 24 in there, a positive 24. On the bottom, 2 times 5 is 10. Did anybody else get 24? On the inside of the square roots. 12 squared. I mean, you can put this 12 in parentheses too, but that's positive. 12 squared minus 5 times, minus 4 times 5 times 6. Anybody get that? Anybody get? What did you get if you didn't get it? 24.
I got negative 264.
Oh, Lordy. Wait, we got 20, 120. Let's put it in the calculator. Oh, I don't want to. I think you can stretch my calculator a little bit bigger so I don't have to waste my screen. It's 12 squared, parentheses, 12 squared minus 4 times 5 times 6, and I get 24. I'm just talking about inside of the square root, not the square root itself. I just want to, I'm doing the math inside the square root.
Okay, I got that. I wasn't putting the parentheses for the
Well,
finding the
yeah,
six.
did you see exactly? That's why when I do the formula, everywhere you see a letter, put the parentheses or something will go wrong. I promise you. The steps are there. You just got to use them. You have to, oh, I messed something up. You have to use that parentheses. I don't know what's going on. All right, this thing is going crazy. So whoever didn't get the 24, did you get it now? I'm hoping you typed it in correctly. So we got the 24. So you can actually put this in your calculator now. X equals negative 12 plus square root of 24 over 10, and we're going to change that to a plus or minus. So put that in your calculator. Negative 12 plus or minus square root of, or just plus the square root of 24 over 10. So I'm going to go to the calculator now and do that. So it's a fraction, and it's negative 12 plus the square root of 24. That's what we got. Then I arrow down, and we got, what do we get, 10 down there? And my answer is a negative 6 in front, square root of 6 plus 5. So this is the answer I got. I'm going to come back to the paper and write it down. The answer I got, this is what my calculator showed, but I'm going to write it down where the negative 6 is in front. And don't forget, in front of the square root, you have to put a plus or minus. In front of that square root, you have to put a plus or minus. So either one is correct. But I mean, you're going to see the homework and everything when they show you the answers. They always have the number in front of the square root, and in front of the square root, you always have the plus or minus. Okay. Any questions on this? I think we have a couple more to do.
We have one left.
Oh, one left?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's try that one. Oh, no. All right, so they still say use a quadratic formula, so we're going to. Guess what we have to do first? We have to get everything ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. We have to get everything on the left side and equal to 0. So to do that, I have to FOIL this. X times x is x squared. X times a -7, -7x. 2 times x is a positive 2x. 2 times a -7 is a -14 equals 9. You see, we're using everything we've done in the past. We're foiling the left side. We're distributing the left side. These two combine. -7 plus 2 is a -5. And now I just need to take the 9 over because it has to equal 0. Take the 9 over. I'm going to subtract 9, and I'm putting the 9 right underneath the 14 because they're numbers and they can be combined. X squared minus 5x minus 23 equals 0. -14 and a -9 is a -23. A equals 1, B equals -5, and C equals -23. So plugging it into the formula, x equals b squared minus 4 times. Hang on. X equals a -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2 times a. I'm going to put a parentheses everywhere I see a letter. I promise you, if you don't put those parentheses when you type it in a calculator, something is going to go wrong. A is 1. So everywhere there's an A, I'm putting a 1. B is 5. B is a -5. And C is a -23. So x equals negative changes to a +5 plus or minus the square root over 2. This is 2. I just need to do the inside of the square root on my calculator. So that's the tough part, doing that inside. Parentheses, don't use the square root, just the -5, -5 squared. Arrow over, -4, parentheses, 1, parentheses, -23, parentheses. And when I do the inside, you should get 117. And this is a 2. Right? 2 times 1 is 2. Did you get 117 when you did the inside of the square root?
I gotta redo it. I got 67.
I got one.
You got 117?
Yes.
Good. Just as long as 2 of us got it right, everybody else, you guys need work.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I was doing it wrong because I wasn't including the parentheses. So
Okay.
now I included them and understand.
Okay, good. So, I mean, you should be able to get that 117 just from the inside of the square root. I'm just typing the inside just exactly as I see it. I mean, on my calculator, I'm typing it in, parentheses. It's kind of hard to see unless you make my window bigger to where you can see it. Parentheses, -5, parentheses, squared, -4, parentheses, 1, parentheses, -23, close parentheses, and it's all there, and you get 117. hit enter, and then once it has to look exactly as I show it on the inside, exactly as that is on the inside, and you should get 117. Now let's put this in our calculator. 5 plus the square root of 117 over 2. On the calculator, hit the fraction button. 5 plus the square root of 117 over 2. And I get 5 plus or minus 3 square root of 13 over 2. So I'm putting the 5. I know the 5 is on the right, but I'm putting it on the left. And in front of the square root, there should be a 3, according to my calculator, and a plus or minus in front of it. When I put this into my calculator, this is what I get. And the whole thing is over 2. And you just have to add the plus or minus symbol. Instead of the plus, you just put the plus or minus, because it's 5 plus that, and then 5 minus that. It's hard typing this into the homework, by the way, also. I mean, you got to get the fraction, one little error, and you got the numbers all over the place. So if we concentrate on doing the square root first, if you end up with a negative like that first problem, you know an I has to pop out. And then you can put the rest in your calculator. But you just know if there's a negative on the inside of an I has to pop out. Any questions on this? This is a tough section. And there's a test or a quiz that's due by Sunday in Module 3. There's a quiz due by Sunday in Module 3. And I'm going to hit